Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and despite Red Bull and Max Verstappen's domination by the numbers so far this season, they have explained that they do not expect this dominance to continue next season, believing they should still be competitive, but the season will be far more hotly contested than it has been this time around. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to discuss. Firstly, just wanted to mention this, Hamilton I think still can get second in this year's championship. It would be a tall task for him to achieve that. Russell is the more likely of the two Mercedes drivers to get to that point. But yeah, this is the first season, if it goes as it presently looks like it will, that neither Vettel nor Hamilton will be in the top two of the championship. That is honestly crazy to think about, right? That every year since they came into the sport in 2007, the one of these two guys has been at the top of the standings, either one or two. It's kind of crazy stuff. This will be the first year that won't be the case if the season continues as it has done so far. But yes, Red Bull, of course, their start of the season wasn't super strong. I mean, obviously it wasn't great firstly in Bahrain and then also Australia. It looked like really Ferrari's championship to lose at that point. But of course they did lose it with impressive rapidity, and over the last few seasons Red Bull have generally been rather strong at the second half of the season. Their development, their upgrades are very good. Their strategy, all this type of stuff is pretty much flawless with Red Bull. And not only do they have that side of things, they've also got a great car to begin with, and of course a great driver in Max Verstappen delivering the results as it stands. Now, of course, questions about the kind of engine project that Verstappen and Red Bull could potentially be using from 2026. Still some talks about this because Porsche, of course, that deal is now off the table. Porsche wanted 50% of the Red Bull project. Red Bull wanted to stay independent. They've said no to that deal. Whether Honda make their return, who knows? Or Red Bull will make their own engine from 2026 onwards, at which point can they compete their engine with Mercedes and the other OEMs? That, of course, is a big question mark, but that's quite a way down the line. And of course, we saw that when Mercedes started out on top from pretty much the start of the turbo hybrid era in 2014, they maintained that level of dominance and having the most competitive car for many years to come and winning all those constructors championships in a row up until, of course, this season. Can Red Bull achieve the same thing over the next 4 or 5 years? Who knows? I think that wouldn't be good for the sport. I know that people want more competition, especially because how it is nowadays with the new regulations is that even if there are upsets in qualifying, Verstappen has an issue with his MGUK to start 10th as he did in Budapest, or whether he has engine penalties or whatever. The new regulations, which do create better racing, but they also mean that drivers that start 14th or 10th or whatever can win with relative ease with the best car and best driver, whereas in previous seasons that wouldn't be the case. So kind of grid penalties and the likes don't really do much nowadays because the drivers can make much better progress in the field than they previously had, which is fine on paper, creates better racing, but it's not maybe the best viewing experience when the top team is way far and beyond compared to the rest of the competition, right? And that was some also talk about Toto Wolff with regard to these penalties, that there isn't really a better solution than to just straight up do grid penalties when you drop down the order. There was some people saying that, okay, if you take another engine above and beyond the capacity you are allowed, then you can potentially get deducted points in the Constructors' Championship. The problem is, if that's the case, it's open to exploitation, right? If you are Red Bull right now, why not just take a new engine every single race, take the 10-point deduction, max out the engine, and have absolutely no issues, right? Because you're dominating the championship, therefore you can afford to take those deductions. So I think that could be open to manipulation. The current format, though, I think we saw in Monza is absolute chaos, right? When you've got 8 different drivers taking all sorts of different penalties, no one knows what's going on. The FIA can't even figure out what's going on for several hours after qualifying concludes. Maybe they are a necessary evil. They do switch up the order, make things rather more interesting at times. But look, at the same time, there is the argument to say, well, maybe there's other ways you could do this in terms of penalties, or maybe even just allow the teams to have more engines per season, because 3 engines on a 23 race, 24 race season as it will be next year, it's just not really possible to create an engine that can perform at that level for that amount of time. The reliability is already absurd enough as it is. So from Red Bull's perspective, their reliability has been pretty damn good since the first couple of races of the season, and they have said that they are not confident, though, that their dominance will be the case in next season. They've won every single race but 4, which is kind of absurd that Ferrari have won, I guess, 3 for Leclerc and 1 for Carlos Sainz at Silverstone, but every other race Red Bull have won this season, which is a remarkable degree of dominance effectively that they have had. Their car hasn't necessarily been dominant in qualifying or anything. In race pace, you'd probably argue it has, and especially with Max Verstappen at the wheel. But Red Bull's chief engineer Paul Monaghan says that next year there's some rule changes, right? So they're raising the floor height to some degree, and also one key point is that where you place in the Constructors' Championship determines at how many hours of wind tunnel testing you have. So if you are second or third, you get 5 or 10% more, I believe, wind tunnel time respectively, and also use of the kind of CFD software, I guess, for simulation and stuff to try and figure out what's going on. So if you win, you get less time to use to try and help the other teams catch up effectively. So that's one tool that Mercedes and Ferrari might have in their pocket, is extra wind tunnel time, extra testing time to maybe close the gap to a certain degree. And of course goes on to say that this year's performance, he's not sure it can be carried over to next year. There's a lot to change. We need to hope that we can adapt to the changes with the height, floor edge height, right? It's being raised by, I think it was 10 millimeters, the raise of the floor edge going into next season. So they're hoping they can adapt to that as well as other teams do, or potentially just lose a similar amount of time per lap as the other teams have done. And I'm like, as he says, I think we'll be competitive next season, but if the question is whether we can repeat what we're doing right now, he's not sure that's the case. We'll do the best job we can, and then we'll see what happens. But yeah, he agrees it's highly unlikely they maintain this level of dominance going into next season. I think in general, look, often there are eras of drivers. There's the Schumacher era, you've got the Hamilton era. Is it now the Verstappen era? That's a question you might ask. But I think in general, fans would like to see other teams be able to be competitive with Red Bull and Max Verstappen in terms of race pace, that right now they're not really. So look, it would be expected that other teams can compete better with Red Bull next year. Whether that will be enough to really kind of halt their dominance, that's another question, because, I mean, look at these numbers, right? These are the finishing positions of the pole sitter this season. Pretty tragic to look at really from the Ferrari perspective. The fact that, I mean, yeah, like obviously Perez came from pole to fourth in Saudi Arabia, got pretty unfortunate that race. But yeah, plenty of technical DNFs here for the Ferrari boys. And looking at the opposite of this from F1 charts, this is really damning, but also just goes to show what Red Bull and Verstappen have achieved this year, saying that, like, look, all these victories Verstappen has had, at least a large percentage of them have not come from pole position, right? Fourth to first. First, of course, he won from pole in Spain, but then third, second, third. Of course, one of these was Perez in Monaco. But even more recently, right, Verstappen wins from 10th, 14th, 7th, first. Doesn't matter where he starts, he's going to win all of the last 5 races regardless. And this type of performance, I'm sure, of course, is helped by the new regulations, the ease of passing around circuits like Budapest and stuff, where it wasn't the case in the past. We saw the numbers recently that in order to pass around Budapest in the previous year's regulations, you needed to be 1.5 seconds quicker per lap than the car in front of you. This season, you needed to be about half a second quicker per lap. So it makes it way easier to make passes. That's good for the racing, but it also means that Verstappen can start anywhere and win a race, which when he's got the best car is seemingly a foregone conclusion right now. Now look, of course, next year could be a different story, but it really does come down to performance of the actual cars. And of course, the team surrounding those cars. We look at the numbers. Verstappen is over 100 points ahead of his nearest rival in Leclerc in terms of team standings in the constructors. Red Bull are so far above and beyond that they can pretty much do whatever they like and still win both championships by the end of the season. So they don't expect to be as dominant next year. I think that makes sense. But the other side of things, of course, is that not just Red Bull have the best car right now in terms of race performance, but they also have the best team. They have the best pit stop crew. They've got the best strategy crew. Like, everything goes into making that team incredibly successful. And that's why they're going to be so hard to beat next year, is that even if they don't have the fastest car, or if they have a joint fastest car, their teamwork is probably the best of anyone on the grid right now. And they've got Max Verstappen in his prime, which of course is a pretty hard combo to beat at the best of times regardless. So yeah, definitely tweet your thoughts down below. I don't expect this year to be as dominant for Red Bull, but of course they are going to go into next season as the big favourites to repeat the trick, and Verstappen will go in as the big favourite to get his third title in a row. I'm sure many are looking back to the 2009 to 2013 Sebastian Vettel days and feeling like a similar period of dominance for Red Bull, and Verstappen could be on the cards. And of course, the question is then going to be there, if they do come out and dominate next year, does that period of dominance within this era of regulations maintain itself in the same way that Mercedes did for the majority of the turbo hybrid era? But very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are new, take care, and I'll see you next time.